Our last speaker this morning is somebody that maybe I think some of you might know. Her name is Helen Alvare. She's a professor of law at the Anton Scalia School of Law at George Mason University, where she teaches family law and religion and property law. Professor Alvare.
Hello, it's so lovely to see you. So yes, I am at they call it the Scalia Law School. When we first got the money, we made the internet mistake of calling it the Antonin Scalia School of Law, and just leaving the acronym there. And when the press asked the dean whether he liked ASSOL as the acronym, he said, you know what? After the donor gave us all those dollar signs to rename it, I kind of couldn't see anything else. So here I am at the now Scalia Law School, which is far better acronym. So as one of the few lawyers in the room, I've decided to be Socratic, pedantic, and legalistic. I hope that's okay. No, actually, I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of how, while it is that the law could not alone have catapulted contraception to the iconic status that it has today, it really did play a very important role, and I want to outline that for you. It was never done vis-a-vis some passage of a law and then deduction from that law as to the role it would play. It was always, from the very beginning, a normative enterprise. The state intended to not only make laws about contraception or to make it available, but to assert certain values that were associated with it and to make very normative claims. So they have made the normative claims that it's a key to women's health, a magic wand against poverty, and even against racial divisions, that it would take care of all the economic divisions that were associated with divisions between races, that it would be the bedrock source of women's social, economic, physical, psychological, and I could go on, equality, because it would leave them alone to make choices, okay? And being alone and an individual was the normative status for being free. So I'm going to unpack this history of the law and its norm speaking, not by a chronological march through the laws, but rather by doing three themes so I can convey what the state thought it was doing and the norms it was conveying. So these themes are three. First, the shift in U.S. policy from a concern in the beginning to promote the physical, economic, health, and welfare of women and children, all the way to where we are today, which is contraception as a key part of the message that sex is the most important part of human freedom. Sexual expression indifferent to marriage and completely severed from the possibility of children. That's the value. And I will parse the law on that for you. At the same time, the state has always and everywhere maintained the value of reducing the number of children born to teenage and poor women. And during the population bomb fears, just reducing the number of children generally. The second theme is the role of law in constitutionalizing, the role of the law that constitutionalized contraception in constitutionalizing abortion, constitutionalizing same-sex sexual relations in the Lawrence case, which I'll mention, and eventually constitutionalizing same-sex marriage. And third, the role of contraception law in today's complete absence of law, welcoming the woman with children into the public square. Because it sucked all the oxygen out of the feminist room, everything else that women wanted was left by the wayside. So the first theme, the shift in policy goals. I'm going to take you in a little bit of chronological march from the beginning policy goals to today. In the beginning, the early contraception laws were put out by someone who actually was a U.S. postal inspector, eventually Anthony Comstock. The Comstock laws in the 1870s, first at the federal level, which concentrated on things you could and could not mail in the federal postage, to Comstock laws at the state level, which banned use, transport, and then aiding and abetting use of everything from porn to abortion, to contraception. And why were these laws put in place? The point was not just a straight-out moral purpose to curb non-marital sex, but just like the laws against cohabitation, against fornication, non-marital sex, and against adultery, lest you think the state was being really, really moral at that time, a large part of the reason was also not to have children dissociated from the support of a mother and father. I mean, the state, I try to tell my students this and they sometimes don't get it, the state does not really care about your romance. It cares about the romance of same-sex couples. It actually does. And you look at the language in Lawrence and Obergefell, and it's very emotional and romantic language. It does not care about the romance of people who can produce children. Regarding those persons, it wants to make sure that there is a mother and a father with a support obligation. Okay? And so it wanted to curb non-marital birth, and all those laws, including the Comstock laws, were for that. Most of these laws were gone or unenforced by the 50s, with the exception of Massachusetts and Connecticut, which had Comstock laws state level on their books. This is where we get the 1965 case of Griswold versus Connecticut. Just the other night on C-SPAN, for all of these super cool people among you, I did a 1.5-hour live dialogue on Griswold. And it was always, people would call in, they're like, I have to say, I'm a lawyer. And I'm like, you're totally boring, I could tell. You're not watching the NCAA finals. You're here with me during the Griswold case. Anyway, Griswold in 1965 is where the modern law gets started. But even before that, you'll be fascinated to know that the very first federal involvement in contraception was when Margaret Sanger persuaded Eleanor Roosevelt that in order to keep women working in the factories without VD and without babies during the World War II, that the Fed should provide women in the factories contraception, and they did. Very, very instrumental, right, for the man. For the production of the defense industry, contraception. But the next really important development was in the Griswold case. And here I have to explain the case, but a wee bit of constitutional law. So Griswold, there's no right of contraception in the Constitution. So when Connecticut comes and says, let's overturn Connecticut's ban, it's not like there is a superior law, the federal Constitution, that had a clear text that could say to Connecticut, I'm sorry, contraception is a constitutional right. What the majority in that case did was say that there are penumbras and emanations. There are indications from the first 8 amendments of the Bill of Rights that there is such a thing called a right of privacy. It doesn't appear in the Constitution, but it's there in your right not to quarter soldiers, or your right to not to incriminate yourself, or your rights to avoid warrantless search and seizures. Okay, so it's there. The dissent in that case, which ultimately led to the law we have today, said the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, you may remember one of the post-Civil War amendments, has a right of liberty. And we hold in the dissent that this right of liberty includes things that are deeply rooted in this nation's history and tradition, implicit in the concept of order and liberty, such that neither liberty nor justice would exist if we did not announce these rights and protect them. What this means is anytime 5 out of 9 people on the Supreme Court find one of these, it is the highest right. Nothing federal can contradict it, and nothing at the state level. No state constitution, no state law can contradict it. And 5 out of 9 people on the court simply have to declare that it exists. The safeguard there is it has to be a long history and tradition that supports it. Okay? So for instance, you may feel differently when you find out that your rights to send your kids to Catholic schools or to have them taught a foreign language is not in the Constitution, but it was found in the Liberty Clause of the 14th Amendment. Why? Well, they said it's just so much a part of our history and tradition that parents control their children's education. So you may like some of these liberty rights, and you may dislike others. The safety valve, Justice Scalia says, has everything in our history and tradition led us to say, oh, the government can't take that right away. including parents' right to educate their children. Of course, you know, abortion was banned, but they found it anyway. Same-sex marriage did not exist anywhere, and 31 or 34 states had banned it in a row, and the Supreme Court still said it's in our history and tradition. So obviously they do what they please. It's the whatever Constitution where the 14th Amendment is concerned nowadays. But that doesn't mean there aren't some valid uses of this. Well, that was the dissent in Griswold, and it later became the source of all these other rights. And remember, because it's put in that liberty phrase, these are rights of enormous social and legal importance. They're called substantive due process rights when you pull them out of the 14th Amendment. Okay, this is what contraception enjoys. Okay, that level of importance. There would be no freedom without it. It is a crucial part of our history and tradition. That's the right it enjoys. To proceed chronologically with the laws, Johnson comes in the 1960s and decides that contraception is a ticket to poverty reduction. So he sets up family planning centers at the time at NIH. Now they're handled by the Department of Health and Human Services. In the 1960s, Nixon goes whole hog in on this, not just domestically, but also internationally. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with the famous National Security Memorandum of Nixon, number 200, where he says, we have to contracept the third world. We need their minerals. If they have too many people, there's going to be social unrest. And let's convince everyone in the third world that their leaders want it so we don't appear to be coercive. If you have any thought that even coercive contraception policy is the purview of the Democrats, just go read yourself some Nixon. And by the way, Bush Sr., who, not to embarrass anyone, but after what we've talked about here today, I don't think I will, they used to call him Rubbers Bush in the Senate because he basically, his whole foreign policy was like, let's contracept the third world. Okay, so in fact, the other night when I was doing the Griswold show, one of the things that was fascinating is the plaintiff is a very, Mount Holyoke girl, married to a State Department guy who is a Yalie. The lawyer, Republican royalty from the state of Connecticut, Yale. All the lawyers involved, Yale. It was a white Republican movement. And when they interview these doctors and the doctors say, hey, fine, wealthy women can get contraception, but we have to make sure the poor can get it because these are the people who really need it. Okay, so don't think it's bipartisan, okay? Then you have 1970, Title X, which was intended not only to address poverty, but also what they perceived to be overpopulation, again, among poor people. Currently, Title X spends $2.1 billion, not Title X, excuse me, the feds, Title X, Medicaid, and other programs, $2.1 billion annually just from the feds on contraception itself. The states add another $225 million annually. So it's 2.3 a year. The push in the feds now is long-acting reversible contraception. I don't know if any of you saw the really scary guidance under the Obama administration, where they said in Medicaid letters to the states, listen, when women who are on Medicaid, read poor women, come in, make sure that you say, okay, we're delivering the baby now, here's your IUD, okay, I'm just gonna put it in now, okay? Make sure you have them on hand, and that the minute the woman comes in about her pregnancy, you start talking to her about the IUD insertion. And it's the Medicaid population, so it is disproportionately poor and minority. Make sure you do it. LARCs are still controversial, but they're a huge push from the Obama administration. I don't think they have widespread acceptance yet, although I know it's growing. And there is even some queasiness among the left on this. When the Brookings Institute got together with the American Enterprise Institute to talk about poverty reduction, the American Enterprise Institute refused to go along with long-acting reversible contraception. And these are these are Republicans who stay away from the culture issues. And even though Brookings ultimately did, there's some misgiving because in the literature, poor and minority women say, you're basically sterilizing us for 3 to 10 years, and we think it's racial. Currently, it is no longer about poverty reduction. It is screaming women's rights 24/7, and the best evidence of this was what we all know as the contraception mandate. They didn't even, I mean, they tried to make this veneer-sized case that this was about women's health. For those of you who really want to see, I think the big undoing of that, I did a 70-page single-spaced article where I took, and it's in the Villanova Law Review on my SSRN page, and I took every medical source cited in the Institute of Medicine report that the feds relied on, and completely, and I don't, not all my articles are this slam dunk. This is slam dunk. Completely undid the feds' medical argument. The real argument there was, if women do not will a child, then she should not have a child. Their attempt to link unintended pregnancy to smoking or violence or obesity fell afoul of every rule in statistics about selection effects, or which one was the cause and which one was the effect, or confounding factors, when all the literature shows that unintended pregnancy doesn't cause women to smoke, get beat, or start drinking. In fact, it's the third factor of women who are risk takers, who both have unintended pregnancies and tend toward these other behaviors, is what the literature actually showed. I mean, their material was so poor. Then they claim it reduces poverty and abortion, and if you looked at their data, you can see that unintended pregnancies and out-of-wedlock pregnancies have actually gone up 50 and 1,200% precisely among the poor since Title X went into effect. It was almost too easy to undo. So they're not making a serious health argument. They can't make a serious anti-poverty argument because poor women have suffered the most since free contraception, in terms of the retreat from marriage, the rise in unintended pregnancies, and the rise in out-of-wedlock births. So what they really were making is the argument, unintended pregnancy. A pregnancy a woman does not will is freedom for women. So we have to get rid of unintended pregnancy. I could go on about that article, and I'll be happy to point you to it when we talk later. The other way that the feds and the state laws have moved away from we can protect the health of women, all the way to, health of women and anti-poverty, all the way to sexual expression without children and indifferent to marriage is freedom, is through the partners that the feds have had. Planned Parenthood is one, and you know their material well. One I want to bring your attention to more. It used to be called the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy. They changed their name to Power to Decide recently. I'd like to think I had a little something to do with that, because NCTUP, I would always refer to them as knocked up. And just saying. And they now have a new name. So anyway, when they were knocked up, they actually, and they were on the Obama administration's HHS website as the instruction for young women. They offered young women a Frisky Friday series offering recipes for aphrodisiac food to heat up your weekend with our sex tips and food. They offered consolation for girls depressed after hookup sex, saying, some of the most modern, empowered, secure, sexalicious women among us have had at least one walk of shame. Their e-cards and graphics for teenagers to download include photos of natural objects resembling genitalia or bondage equipment. Its About Us section that the feds would refer you to touts a women's right to a happy, healthy sex life without worrying about pregnancy. It has a booty log app for your phone to record your, quote, sexcapades and tell everyone about them, and urged readers to cohabit and have non-marital babies, advising, just don't feel bad about your choice if you choose not to marry but have a baby. If it's right for you, it's right. Okay, this is the federal website, HHS, linking to this partner and giving enormous quantities of money regularly to Knocked Up. My last 2 points, and I'm trying to end in like 4 minutes here, is the role of constitutional contraception in constitutionalizing abortion, then sodomy, and the Texas law was called an anti-sodomy law, so I'm not using a language that the law did not, and the same-sex marriage. It's a familiar story how laws constitutionalizing contraception did this. In fact, I was on a panel at Yale Law School not too long ago, and I had there's a guy who's their family law professor now. He is a openly gay law professor. He used to run gay law for the I think it was UCLA or Berkeley, and now he's Yale's family law professor. And I was arguing about a children's rights perspective on Obergefell, and he said to me, let's face it, all of those cases that came before that said that what the Supreme Court was valuing was sexual expression without children, it was you all, it was heterosexuals and their demands for contraception and abortion that paved the way for Obergefell, and you know it. Couldn't discount that. The trajectory can be briefly summarized. What are the mediating factors linking contraception that came after it? First, 1972, Eisenstadt versus Baird says that the right of contraception is not something that inheres in married people or the married bedroom, but it's a right to decide really important things about your life, like how many kids you want to have, married or single. It said marriage is not a unit, it's two individual people making private decisions inside their head, and the right of privacy guaranteed by the Constitution is between each of their sets of ears, okay? Then it was also linked with, the right of privacy was linked with sex without children and completely indifferent to marriage in the Roe versus Wade opinion, where the court was addressing single or married women and giving them a right to abortion based on the right of privacy, citing both Griswold and Eisenstadt. In Lawrence versus Texas, where the Supreme Court made sodomy a federal constitutional right, and in the Obergefell opinion, constitutionalizing same-sex marriage, they focused on individual decisions in the heads of people that were fundamental to their identity creation as the source of, as the definition of the right of privacy. In Obergefell, the court cites the contraception cases when it says the fundamental liberties protected by the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause extend to personal choices central to individuals' dignity and autonomy, including intimate choices defining personal identity and beliefs. Do you hear anything in there about partners, pairs, married couples? The right of privacy is a right to decide your own identity, your own beliefs. It's for one person at a time, which is very ironic to see in a case about marriage, isn't it, right? So avoiding children, which had already been linked with substantive due process level goods, made it perfectly simple for the Obergefell court to conclude that states could no longer argue that they had any interest in, let alone favoring for, procreative couples or linking those couples with their children. In fact, Obergefell stands for the proposition that states are forbidden from valuing procreation, procreative couples, or linking children with their kin. They are forbidden from giving that any special value. Final point, the role of contraception in the continuing absence of laws welcoming women and children to the public square. The contraception cases communicated that being without children is a good that many wish to achieve. The contraception mandate says it is women's highest good, and all women should understand this, okay? Contraception law also reinforces the idea that the way to achieve freedom is to be by yourself. Abortion cases do the same thing. Lawrence and Obergefell even talk about rights to do something with a partner, whether sex or marriage, but as creating your identity. You choose this expression because it shapes you. So freedom in connection with sexual expression is all about self-creation, okay? And in the case of women, it's about making yourself equal to men by being able to have sex with no childbirth like men and then enter the public square in that unencumbered manner. So once lawmakers and a wide swath of citizens have imbibed the notion that women's chief freedom is the power to avoid children, this completely quashes the idea that citizens have duties to women who make these super private choices to have children to stand in solidarity with them. And then the final point, of course, is practically speaking, the organizations that have been in the vanguard of feminism, the ones that claim to speak for all women, which is why I helped invent Women Speak for Themselves. Like, excuse me, no, there's several hundred million of us that you don't speak for, probably billions. Just haven't been able to get outside the country with that yet. But, you know, the idea that all women stand for this And the groups that have led the fight, National Organization for Women, Planned Parenthood, if you look at their What Women Want sections, it is always contraception and abortion first. This has sucked all the oxygen out of the room that might have been devoted to questions like a family wage, a living wage, flexible work schedules, parental leave, etc. Contraception and abortion, the power to be alone, not in community, has sucked it all up. And of course, who suffers the most is people who are vulnerable. Poor children suffer, poor women suffer, as nobody says to them, you have a human right to be married if that's your vocation and to have marital children. And instead, the only right the government seems eager to give them is the right to be alone with their contraception and their neighborhood abortion clinics. So I know we have a panel later. We could talk further. Thank you very much.